When you're TIG welding, you do not need to feather your tacks where you're going to be taking off. As you can see up here on that top tack, I've got it feathered down where I'm going to be tying into it. I highly recommend feathering a tack where you're going to tie in, but it really is not necessary to feather a tack where you're taking off. If it's super thick on a production tack where you're going to be taking off, it might be alright to go ahead and feather that. You might need that. That might be something that could help, especially if you're not really good at getting that puddle initiated before you start moving. The key to it is you fire up on your tack back here and you run this to the tip of your tack, and you want to have your wire right there ready to go to catch as soon as you get the top of that tack heated up. So that's just a personal preference of mine. Some people like to feather their tacks on both sides all the way around. Generally, where I'm going to be taking off, if it's, like I said, if it's not super thick, I tend to leave it. I just barely bumped it here to get that little bitty fisheye out. But 9 times out of 10, guys, I won't feather where I'm going to be taking off. I'll just feather it where I'm going to be tying in. You might try it, see what you think. It might save you a little bit of time and effort on the next coupon you're welding or test that you might be taking. Another pipe welding tip for you guys, especially if you're going to be TIG welding or even running 60-10, it really doesn't matter. But as you can see here, this gap is fairly large. This is set up for a TIG root. One thing you want to always do is, whether you put 4 production tacks in this, whether you bridge tack it, it really doesn't matter. I've been to a couple of places where they did not allow bridge tacks. You had to put production tacks in. So a production tack is basically your root that conjoins the 2 pieces of pipe together. The production tack has to be an existing portion of that root pass. So if you do that, and they require, it's crazy what places will and won't require. So 4 production tacks, top, bottom, left, and right. So basically 12 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and 9 o'clock. Those production tacks, after you get those in, you want it to be as square as possible when you start. As you start to weld the tightest gap first, because if you weld something else on the opposite side, say you weld your preferred gap over here because this gap was a little bit too tight, as you run that preferred gap, that gap that was a little bit too tight is going to continue to close up. The more you weld on this thing and the more heat you put in, the more this is going to shrink together. So make sure when you go to take a weld test, you start off with that tightest gap first. In a perfect world, you'll have one section that's just a little bit bigger than the rest, or 1/2. You're going to want to weld the opposing side first. Weld the tight gaps first, and then your big gaps will slowly start to shrink up, and hopefully you'll have it planned out and set just right to where everything is as it should be in the end. Let's talk a little bit about backfeeding when TIG welding a root pass, guys. So the first thing I want to point out is, when you backfeed, you do not have to drop it from the complete opposite side of the pipe. Now you can do this. This is something that a lot of people do, and that's perfectly fine. If you can do it and prevent cold wire, which is basically burning off the edge of this and leaving a little portion of that wire behind in your root pass, if you get good enough at it and you can obviously put this root pass in and not leave cold wire throughout your whole root, then absolutely, go for it. That is perfectly fine. One thing I will say about backfeeding is, this is how I always do it. I have my wire inside the pipe, and it's coming down and it's getting the bulk, specifically for the bottom half of the pipe, it's getting the bulk of that wire inside that bevel edge, or I'm sorry, inside that pipe. So your bevel edges are going to see maybe 1/3, possibly 1/4 of that wire thickness, and the rest of that thickness of that wire is going to be inside this pipe. Now, as you work up to your tack, up here at the top corner, you can obviously have less wire in there unless you change your angle. You have to play with that for your tie-ins, but on the top side, you can pretty much leave your wire half and half, and you'll be good to go. So down here on the bottom side, like I said, this is technically backfeeding. You don't have to come from the complete opposite side of the pipe to do this. Practice it, and you won't have to feed as much wire if you get your gap and your heat just right. So that's how I've always liked to do it. I've enjoyed it, and it works for me. This is something you have to know if you're going to be TIG welding stainless steel. Guys, you see this little bitty pinhole right here? This is caused by leaving the fisheye in your root pass right in the center of your weld when you break your arc. Now, what you want to do to prevent this, because this will bust you on a bend test if they bend it right here and it goes all the way through to the inside of your root, and X-ray especially. If the sucker goes all the way through, which 9 times out of 10 on a root pass, if it looks like that, it's going all the way through your coupon. So what you're going to want to do, if you don't have a foot pedal and you're using the same old machines that you normally would here in the Good USA, you won't have your foot pedal. So you're going to take this thing, that fisheye, and you're going to run it up the bevel edge just a little bit. Don't come all the way out to your pipe itself. Run it up that bevel edge and then break your arc. You don't want to be busting weld tests or getting busted out on the job because you leave a fisheye in the center of your root pass and you just break that arc and leave a little bitty pinhole in your weld. Everything else about your weld can be perfect, but if you've got these, you're not going to pass X-ray. Chances are if they bend it on one of these on a root pass, you're not going to pass that either. Don't do that. Walking the cup in a root pass. Guys, it's really personal preference for a lot of people, whether they're going to walk the cup or freehand. I learned how to walk the cup before I could freehand. I'm not saying that's the right way to do it, that's just how I learned. Oftentimes I will hold my rig like so for walking in a root pass. And all you're going to do, guys, when this is a root and you don't have any meat on anything yet, all you have to do is just barely put a little bit of forward pressure in there and just wiggle that cup side to side. You want that tungsten to just cover the edges of your bevel. And as you wiggle across and your filler wire is in there, you're going to go from bevel edge to bevel edge, left and right, and left and right. And if you get your heat down good and you keep your rod in there just right, you will have an outstandingly beautiful root pass. Now, this takes a lot of practice, takes a lot of time. It looks absolutely beautiful. And guys, it's hard to beat walking a root pass in on the top half of the pipe, in my opinion. Like I said, it can just be so smooth and so effortless once you get good at it. If your gap's set right, your filler wire's the right size for your gap, and you got your heat just right, man, it goes in there nice and smooth. So if you're just going left and right, wiggling back and forth with a little bit of forward pressure. This can be done holding the rig way back here if it's hot. All you're doing is just wiggling that cup back and forth. Put that root pass in there, give it lots of practice, make it something proud of when you walk away from it. It's a super simple trick, but some people probably haven't thought about it yet. So when you're TIG welding and you're going out in the field, you're going out and you've got weld tests to take, you've got a bunch of welds to make out in the field after you get on a job, take your tungsten, break it in half. I say break it, that's kind of dangerous. Tungsten's very, very brittle, and if you just snap it, it fragments. Protect your eyes, don't do that, it's a bad idea. If you cut these in half or even into thirds, and generally half is the best way to go about it because it gives you the most use out of your tungsten. This one's pretty well half. As you can see, the rest of these I've used a lot. They get shorter over time, obviously. But if you cut them in half, you can sharpen both sides of your tungsten. And then, once you get a good collection made up and you've got all these sharp and ready to go, you can sometimes go like a week without having to worry about sharpening tungsten because you've got all of these prepped and ready to go. This side gets a little bit boogered up, whoop-de-doo. You pull it out, you flip it around, you weld with that one for a day. Then same thing with the rest of these. You've got so many pieces stockpiled up. That's why I like to have a big tungsten holder. I, at one point in time, had this sucker plumb full. I could sharpen tungsten for 2 hours, and then I would be good to go. If I was having a good week, I wouldn't have to sharpen tungsten for a whole week, if not 2 weeks. So 2 hours to save myself a whole lot of time in the future? Heck yeah.